Alright, lads and ladettes, today we're going to be tackling a question from the audience, from a veteran Brojo member, E-Man, and he's going to be asking me a few questions about how life has changed for me since I had a kid. If I seem a little tired or worn out, it's because I've just come back from surgery in the hospital on my testicles, of all places, so I'm not in top shape, but, videos need to be done. So he sent me a few questions, and I'm just going to freestyle my answers. I haven't prepped for this. I'm just going to talk off the top of my head and see what happens. So the general question is, what is it like for you on the other side, having and raising a family? So it's not just about having a kid, but I think the whole getting married part, all that sort of thing, giving up my previous sort of single, free life, if you want to call it that, for, commitment and loyalty and long-term plans. So he says his group of friends weren't really into self-improvement before they started their families, so he's curious to see how my life has changed. And this brings up my first point, which is I think, in my opinion, way too many people setting up a family, doing long-term commitments, having kids, before they even know who the fuck they are, right? Before they've even established the basic foundation of self-confidence, of core values and morality, of knowing, who they are and what they want from life. They just sort of follow that recommended path. It's a path of least resistance for some people. I remember I was on that stream when I got to university. I didn't really know why I was at university other than everyone went to university and I did well at school, so that was just this natural next step. And it felt like being carried away on a stream, like I wasn't really making decisions for myself. And on the other hand, I did, big impulsive things, got myself into all sorts of debt and stuff like that, because I just go with whatever I felt like really impulsively and spontaneously. And those two factors combined, like not making decisions consciously and just going with, the cultural trends, as well as impulsively making decisions just based on whims, leads people to kind of set their lives up very early on and, dig themselves into positions that are hard to get out of, like commitments, debt, having kids, marriage, so on. And they do this before they have a fucking clue of who they are, what they really want, anything. A lot of people, they'll marry someone just because the person loves them and they love them back, without even enough time to figure out, would we do well together for decades? We've only been together for a couple of years. Do I even know myself well enough to know how I'm going to handle a relationship? Am I sure that I'm not going to have regrets about, playing the field and having some variety first, and so on? People make these decisions so early. And, all of those aren't so bad, except for having kids. To bring a child in the world, what I see psychologically is a lot of people have children while they are still children in here. They haven't worked through their childhood trauma yet. They haven't matured psychologically into adults. They still handle life poorly. If things upset them, they explode. They don't express themselves well. They require other people's approval and validation to make decisions about their life. I mean, that's like a child or a teenager. They're rebellious, maybe like a teenager, whimsical like a teenager. And there's nothing wrong with being like that per se, but that's no position to be raising a child. A child needs you to be at your best. Now, no human's perfect, and I'm not claiming to be. But I do think I am emotionally mature and psychologically experienced and trained enough now to qualify for parenthood, to be relatively sure that I'll do a good job at being a dad. And I don't believe that I'm superior to others, more like just further along in my training than some. And others could get there if they did the same training. But I didn't have my kid until I was in my late 30s. I know people who had their first kid in their early 20s. I think back to me being in my early 20s. Jesus Christ, do not give me the care of a child. I'm not ready. I can't even take care of myself. And that's the case for most people. Not all, but most. So the point he's making here, that many of his friends kind of built a family before they had even worked on their own shit, it is a recipe for disaster quite often. I mean, there's a reason that most people struggle psychologically is because their parents struggled when they were children. You know, they didn't have emotionally mature, stable, psychologically confident parents. They had parents who were still teenagers or even children in here. And that's what they were raised by. And you're going to end up with trauma and wounds and misdirection and all kinds of problems. You know, this is a reason that we want adults to raise children and not children to raise other children. We don't realize that just because you're physically an adult doesn't mean you're mentally an adult. So what I'm saying might be quite judgmental and controversial, harsh even. I can't think of anything else that's more true to say. Simple fact is, you know, in my line of work, my entire, you know, professional career, I've seen the result of what we would call bad parenting. And I don't mean bad like in a comparative measure. What I mean when you think of what a confident, well-balanced, emotionally mature person can do as a parent compared to what you see out there, right? That, where very few people meet that kind of idealized model of being a parent. And you might say I'm setting the bar too high. But frankly, I just think we've set the bar too low. I mean, we require people to go through licensing to drive a car, but you don't have to go through anything to be a parent, right? You don't even have to prove that you won't kill your kids, right? You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to show that you have even the slightest bit of psychological stability. You don't have to show that you can manage your finances well enough to support a family. You don't have to show that you have a basic understanding of psychology that will be to the benefit of raising a child. You don't have to show anything. And unfortunately, a lot of people get into it before they have any of those things. And it's painful for everyone involved. So, I consciously waited to have a kid. Even when I was kind of in my incel phase and it wasn't really a choice anyway, I couldn't have had a kid even if I wanted to. There's part of me that knew I just wasn't ready to be a parent. It would not have been fair to the child for me to be a parent. And by the time we actually decided to have a kid, I had crossed a threshold where I was like, okay, now I can rely on myself to be a good dad. Now I know that I will raise a child well. You know, that I've got the understanding of human psychology to, you know, not interfere, but apply the right amount of boundaries and respect and discipline, and, you know, show lots of love and compassion, have time and availability to build a connection without being a pushover, to have all that balanced out and to know that I do a reasonably good job at it. I had to wait until my late 30s before I felt, yeah, I've got that sorted now. Like I said, I believe anyone can get there. But most people aren't there yet. And most people who have kids aren't there yet. And having a kid actually aggravates the issues. As I'm going to go into, it's very hard to start working on yourself after having a kid, or at least in those early few years where most of the either good stuff or the bad stuff is done to the child. You know, your first 3 to 5 years with a child is where you're going to do the biggest impact as a parent. After that, their peers start to take over as influences. And by the time they're sort of 10 or 13, you no longer have much of a role at raising them at all. But if you're all fucked up in those first few years, your kids are going to be fucked up. And it might be really hard for them to undo that damage, because you're doing it before they have critical thinking, before they have understanding, reasoning, so on. So, anyway, how has my life changed? Dramatically. You know, I'd say my definition of freedom has had to change significantly. I always believe freedom's a choice. And by that I mean, as long as you've chosen the life that you have, then you are free. And even if that life is forced upon you, you can still choose to choose it. Now, I've chosen to be a parent. So on paper, I look very limited. You know, I've dedicated my time to being a dad and a husband. I'm ruthless in portioning out that time. You know, I've had to say no to all the other things in order to create that time. And as long as I always remember that that's a choice, then I feel free. When I lose sight of the fact that I've chosen that, when I, those weaker moments, I feel like I'm being imposed on, then I don't feel free. Whereas it was a lot easier to feel free before I had a kid, because I could just do whatever I want and the consequences didn't matter. Nobody really got harmed by my actions. Even when I was married, I didn't feel a real loss of freedom, because my wife and I were so in sync that there was really nothing I wanted to do that would have harmed her anyway. I didn't have to compromise. With a kid, I have had to choose. I've had to deprioritize things. I can't just spend all my time doing hobbies now. I could, but then I'd have to be an absent father. So some of the things that have changed. He's got some questions specifically. How have healthy habits held up? Am I still having cold showers, intermittent fasting, exercising? For most of the first 2 years, no. That crashed and burned. I could barely find time to go food shopping. Now, this was partly a choice. Like I said, I want to be a really involved dad. And it was partly circumstances. My wife was devastated physically and emotionally by the birth. She got hit very hard. It was a very strenuous birth with long-lasting ripple-out effects, especially physically. So she was almost disabled by the birth to some extent, and hormonally really, wiped out by it. So in order to support her, I wasn't, I was working and doing 50% of the parenting. So I was really doing more than my fair share in the early days, you might say. Well, not more than my fair share, that's not how I'd say it, but I was doing more than half the work because I was the stronger one. And I had to give up almost anything that was not completely necessary. I didn't even have 10 minutes a day to do HIIT training. Or even if I did, I didn't have the energy because, baby was keeping us up all night. I was getting sort of 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and that happened for at least the first 18 months. Things like cold showers and stuff. I couldn't have a shower and leave the baby unattended, so that wasn't happening. Intermittent fasting, special diets, it would just been too difficult for us to prepare our meals, which is already a huge challenge with me having some special thing that needs to be made up on the side and so on. So I sacrificed a lot to make the parenting bit easier for us. And at some point, that was no longer necessary, but I got into a kind of a rut of living that way. So even when I started to have some dim awareness that more time was becoming available and that perhaps I could be a bit more assertive about me time and things that I required that were just for me, even though it benefits the family, of course, I kind of was unaware of it, or I just got into a pattern of constantly being there. Like, one of the mistakes I think Lucy and I made is we doubled up on a lot of the parenting. So we'd both be there for a task that only requires one parent. We'd both be looking after Chloe when one person could be doing something else. And that's because I got anxious with Lucy's issues that she had from the birth. I got anxious and started to kind of overprotect her. It wasn't so much helicopter parenting, it was more like helicopter partnering. Which was the old people pleaser in me coming up. This was one of the biggest relapses and trials I've had in my recovery as a nice guy, to have a wife who's devastated physically and emotionally and a baby to take care of. My nice guy inside me was very, very triggered. This was fixer, helper stuff. People literally begging me for help. It was very hard for me to distinguish the difference between genuine giving and fixing/controlling. And at some point I lost sight of that difference. I don't regret what I've done so much, but I certainly don't like some of the intentions I had, some of the, drivers and motivators I had. But given the situation we're in, we had no grandparent support, no babysitting, nothing. It was just us. And, one of us was decommissioned. I did the best I could, but I certainly wouldn't recommend the way I did it to somebody else. Not that it was bad for Chloe. Chloe, my daughter, she's grown up with all the signs of, very high self-confidence. She's doing incredibly well. She's advanced for her age in all the categories. She's sociable and friendly and sure of herself and assertive and curious and learning quickly and so on. She's showing all the signs of a confident kid. So she's done well out of this deal. But Lucy and I have suffered more than we need to, probably, because of some of those patterns. So I've only just started getting back into it. Chloe's about to have her second birthday, and only just now. Please be recording, okay. So I've only just started to get back into it. Chloe's about to have her second birthday. I've just started an exercise program. It's been interesting because when I started it, first I had these major dental issues that fucked up my ability to eat. Then I got COVID, and then I had the surgery I just had. So it's like, if there is a God, he really doesn't want me to focus on my health. But I've been strong and defied, the excuses to give up. And now I am doing the stuff like the fasting and the working out and all that kind of stuff, in the gaps between diseases anyway. And there's really no suffering from the other two because of this. I could have done this earlier, frankly. But once a kid gets sick and everything, it's easy to keep up that bad habit pattern that once was necessary and now no longer is. You just get into that rut, and that's what happened. One of the questions he asks, is life more stressful but more satisfying? It's a difficult question. On one hand, I'd say the last 2 years are by far the hardest I've had in my entire life, and I've had some hard years. But also I've had some of the biggest emotional highs of my entire life, and very frequently too. Like almost every day I get a big, like, overwhelming sense of love or something during a moment with my daughter or my wife or both. That was rare or non-existent in my life prior to this. And yet in the same day I can crash right down to a zero and just be like, fuck this shit, I want off this bus. What the fuck, it's so unfair. Man, get into a big victim state. All in a single day I can go from that high to that low. So I can't say it's the worst 2 years, because that's not true. I can't say it's the best either, because that's not true. I don't know what to say. It's almost like I'm living two lives. One of them is miserable. It's the life where I don't have time for hobbies and socializing. I don't get any fucking sleep. Just exhausted all the time. More disconnected from my wife than we've ever had before, and we had such a great connection. There's that side, which is just horrible. And then there's the other side where it's like I've got this person in my life, there's my daughter, who's like a creation that me and my wife put together, and it's just, there's no way to describe how awesome it is to watch this thing grow with a personality and everything. She's funny. I didn't think somebody under the age of 2 could be hilarious, like sense of humor funny, not laughing at her, but she's funny. She's deliberately being funny, and she's interesting. I'm not bored of her at all. And, to be loved like that, she loves me better than a dog can love me. Do you know what I mean? Like, because it's human, it's thought through. She doesn't have to love me, but she does anyway. To have that kind of just unconditional love from someone that you created yourself, and you didn't force it, you didn't trick them into it, you let them decide for themselves, and they decide that they do. I mean, is there anything better in the world than that? Really, is there anything better than that? I don't think there is. I haven't experienced anything that's more rewarding than that in my entire life. So all of that's happening at the same time, quite often on the same day. I'm pretty worn out by the highs and lows. I'm not really an emotional guy. I've been numb most of my life, and since I started being more honest and working on myself, my range opened up a bit. And since having a kid, the range has just been blown out of proportion. I've cried more since Chloe was born than the rest of my life combined, right? I can't believe how weepy I am these days. By my standards, it's still like once every few months, but for me, it's still heaps. And yet I have these highs, like I have sensations of love that are so strong, it actually hurts, burns almost like acid. It's just so wonderful. So it's exhausting. What I'd say is I would never regret it. I would never change a thing. I wouldn't change a single detail, because then it would change the outcome. I wouldn't have Chloe exactly as she is. So whatever led up to this, whatever hell we went through to make this happen, it is absolutely worth it. But I'm not going to over exaggerate like some parents do and say it's totally worth it, like there's no struggles at all, like everything's made up for. No, the suffering is fucking real. Like, it hurts. You pay a high price. Some parents don't, it's not the same for every parent. Some parents, they get great sleep, they got 2 sets of grandparents to help out, plenty of money. The kid's a good sleeper and like does really well and all that, and they're crushing it. Good for them, and I'm jealous of them. Really, I'm envious of them, because we're not at the other end of the spectrum where you got, like, say, a husband who bails on you and your kid's a fucking nightmare, or your kid's got serious illness or whatever. We're somewhere in the middle where we've got a great kid, but a really hard life around that kid. We don't have the support. It's been really hard on my business. When I have to do like so much of the parenting, my business took a big hit. I just wasn't available. I went from working from like 5 or 6, 7 hours a day down to like 2 or 3. I just couldn't do enough work to bring in more clients and so on. And even when I could, I was just so exhausted and distracted, and I was getting interrupted all the time. I just couldn't do the quality of work that I used to do. So my business took a bit hit, which was hard on us financially. Not terrible, but enough to worry about, which is, you don't need more worries when you got a kid. And and both Chloe and Lucy had physical problems early on, which was very stressful as well. So you might pay a high price for having a kid. And that's why I say you got to be ready. You got to be fucking confident, have your life sorted, know who you are, what you're doing with it. You've got to have that space in your life preserved. Like before Chloe was born, during the pregnancy, we'd have these big like hours of free time during the day, and we'd talk about how time's going to be taken up by Chloe. We're pre-prepared that time. Whereas other people have a super busy life and then try to fit a kid into it, and they haven't even like squeezed anything out. They haven't deprioritized anything, given anything up. They haven't made space for the kid. And of course they crash and burn. Anyway, last question was, how much personal free time to yourself do you have? What does it look like these days? Well, more recently, I've started to do more. I like to play chess online. That's an easy one to kind of sneak in on the sidelines. Socializing a little bit. I don't know that many people here in Czech. I just never got around to building a social circle since Chloe was born. But I know a couple of people, so I've had a couple of times out with them. And, like I said, getting into health and fitness. There isn't much I want out of life, thankfully. I don't need a lot. My personal free time, I'm usually bored, like, what's everyone else doing? Because, once I've read a book or played a game of chess, I'm fulfilled, But that time is now available, and Lucy and I have kind of updated our parenting technique. We've talked about it. We've realized we don't need to double up on everything anymore. Chloe started to go to daycare a couple of days a week, finally. So it's not just us all the time. And Lucy's health problems have eased up. So I'm in a period of time now where I can be a bit more sort of self-centered and do some more stuff for me, which of course is going to benefit the family. And so once I recover from surgery and all that, I'm going to have a few hours per week that are just for me, which I'm really looking forward to. And then hopefully that will convert into hours for me and Lucy. We don't have much in the way of babysitting or childcare, but we're looking forward to maybe having some dating and stuff come back into our lives. So that's what it's been like. It's been a massive change in my lifestyle, but it's one I signed up for. It's one I was prepared for. I think it's actually, like, Chloe turned out better than I hoped for. She amazes me. I was kind of hoping just for a kid that wasn't completely fucked up, and instead I get this kind of angel, even though she doesn't sleep. And yeah, I'm just, most of the time when I'm not having moments of highs with her, I'm sort of surviving and dragging along the bottom to trying to just wait until we can get our head above water till Chloe becomes more independent, before we can get more support for helping with her and slowly sort of climb out and have a life for ourselves again. I can see it coming. It's building up, and just had to be patient. Anyway, so that's how having a kid's changed me. It's just me being honest. Hopefully it's informative for some people. And I will say, if there's anybody out there who wants to have kids and they want to make sure that they get the parenting right, I'm not a parenting expert per se, but I can definitely help you become a confident person of integrity, and you can rest assured that good parenting would come from that quite naturally. Don't have to worry about techniques and stuff. If you got your own shit sorted, it's role modeling that is most of parenting anyway. So if you can model, being a strong, healthy, confident person, then you don't need to worry too much about your parenting style. So those are my thoughts. Hope to help. Get in touch if I can help you. Dan@brojo.org. See you guys next time. Cheers.